Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dr. MC's Self-Care Cabaret podcast. I'm Teresa Melito-Conners, a doctoral level educational administrator and mental health practitioner focused on helping you, our world's helpers. Every day, we have a choice to prioritize our well-being, to incorporate reflection, recovery, renewal, and resilience strategies into our lives. However, those of us who step up and serve our communities in healthcare, education, nonprofit spaces, and more can struggle with putting ourselves first. I've seen this firsthand, and it's a challenge. Enter Dr. MC's Self-Care Cabaret podcast. Here we have real, intimate conversations with leading experts passionate about accessible, sustainable self-care in its 10 domains. It's all about the hard work we can take on together to find our spotlight. Before we dive into today's guest, I want to talk a little bit about our bodies and the relationship that you have with your body. And I invite you to maybe just take a moment and really think about everything that your body does to keep you going, day in and day out. Things that just automatically happen, things you take for granted, and more. We tend to be really hard on our bodies, beat ourselves up. We think we know better than our bodies, but we don't. Our bodies are really, really smart. So if you feel so inclined and maybe want to work a little bit on your relationship with your body, and this episode interview will definitely want you to do more of that, but I encourage you to write yourself a letter. Write a letter to your body, maybe a letter of appreciation or gratitude, and literally just start with, "Dear body," and go from there. I've spent many years being really hard on my body and not appreciative for all the things that it does for me and continues to do for me every day. And sometimes it's just nice to take a second and practice some gratitude for it and appreciation as you work to change your relationship with your body. And today, we are going to talk to Patrilie Hernandez, who is a fat, multiracial, neuroatypical, queer femme of the Puerto Rican diaspora. They have worked in the health and nutrition sector as an educator, advocate, and policy analyst for 15 years, which has shaped their understanding of how the pursuit of health seamlessly intersects with the built environment, equity, and social justice. It wasn't until they were diagnosed with an eating disorder in 2017 that they realized how much of their own disordered behaviors and thoughts around food, health, and bodies infiltrated all aspects of their personal life and career. Since then, Patrilie has focused on recovering and healing from their eating disorder, negative body image, and internalized oppression. Patrilie uses their own lived experiences and body liberation journey to disrupt the status quo of current health and wellness spaces, including advocating for a paradigm shift largely informed by social determinants of health. Combining their academic background in culinary arts, anthropology, nonprofit management, public health, and nutrition, Patrilie currently works as a consultant, partnering with medical, healthcare, and education providers in integrating weight-inclusive, interdisciplinary, and multidimensional strategies that aim to improve the health of historically marginalized populations. And without further delay, here is our conversation. All right, Patrilie, thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Teresa. I am ecstatic to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. So let's dive right in. We're on the Self-Care Cabaret podcast. So my first question is, how do you like to practice self-care?
So I think that self-care, right? I think self-care is romanticized a lot, right? When we think of self-care, a lot of people think of like essential oils and bubble baths and massages. And don't get me wrong, I love doing all of that. If you're into astrology, I am a Taurus. So I love kind of the luxurious, any like luxury spa service you can get, I love.
Awesome.
But I could put a lot of pressure on myself for wanting to practice self-care, because I think, right, like we have to get those spa treatments, or we have to really have long windows, right, like of time where we can practice self-care. But for me, I am able to practice self-care all throughout the day, in many, many actions, right, that help me thrive. And if that even means just barely surviving through the day, that is self-care, right? So what does that look like? It could be something as small as taking my medication, right?
Absolutely.
I take my medication. That's a form of self-care. Sometimes that looks like stepping away from the computer for 15 minutes and closing my eyes. That's a form of self-care. Boundaries are a form of self-care.
Yes, we
right?
love boundaries here.
Yes, in your relationships. So if you're like, oh, I can't do that, I'm at capacity, that's self-care for me. So I really do look at kind of the little things. And those are just kind of 3 examples that I use day to day.
Yeah, those are great examples. We don't talk about mani-pedis and spa days here at the Self-Care Cabaret.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Although, I mean, they're lovely.
But I love them.
Yeah,
I love them.
100%.
I love a good mani-pedi.
100%. But that's not like the real meaning of self-care. Like that's much more like what you were talking about, like setting those boundaries, making sure you're taking medication, you're giving yourself breaks. Rest is important. Relationships are important. These are all the things that I try to teach in my
cuddling
work.
with my dog. I love cuddling
That's
with my dog.
another great one. Absolutely. So it's not those. I think a lot of times people get the kind of the wrong idea of it and think, oh, it has to be this luxurious, expensive thing that takes all day. And, oh, I can't do that. That's how we get into the mindset where people think that it's a luxury and then they neglect their needs.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. You're 100% on target.
Well, thank you. And I love that you just dove right in telling me you're a Taurus. I love astrology. I'm a Pisces.
Okay.
But that's fun. I mean, I'll start asking guests what their signs are. I love that. So you also, on your website and whatnot, you describe yourself as a culture examiner, knowledge sharer, and weaver of relationships and ideas. I thought that was beautiful. Can you explain a little more about that and the work that you do?
Yeah. So those kind of roles, those are life roles, right, that I was able to explore. I went on a spiritual retreat a few years ago, and we did a lot of introspection around, everyone has this kind of archetype that they might fit into, in life, in the way that we relate to others, in the way that we relate to the earth, right, like to the land. So I was able to do a lot of reflection, and these 3 things, these are 3 archetypes or 3 roles that show up in various aspects of my life, not just in my professional life, but in my personal life, in my spiritual life, in my life in relation to others, right? How they just kind of show up over and over. So when I identify as a culture examiner, that is something that I have had this kind of natural curiosity about the world and why we do the things that we do ever since I was a very, very young child. My mother, thankfully, was patient with me for most of the time because I would always be asking, why is this? Why is that? Why is that? She's in early childhood. So I think she was able to nurture that in a pretty positive way. But yeah, ever since I was young, I've always wondered, like, what makes people tick, right? Why do we engage in certain rituals, right? Where from a bird's eye view, they seem to be very random or very, insignificant. But when I dive into examining, human behavior, what motivates us to act, to love, to harm, to all of these things, it gives me kind of a sense of understanding, and it helps me be at peace with things a lot more. Yeah. So by being able to examine our environment, which culture is part of, why humanity does what it does, it just helps me be at peace with a lot of things, right? And being at peace doesn't mean that I'm okay with it.
Sure.
It just means that this is how it is, and I have a little bit more control over how I respond.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So a knowledge share, this theme has been coming up a lot in my life recently, but I think this role really encompasses my love of books and knowledge and reading and sharing and synthesizing what I learn with other people. I feel like my head is full of like useless trivia, but I'm always able to, share it with folks in like the most random moments. That might be my introvertedness, that might be my neurodivergence, right? That I just have all these random facts in my head from just reading and this kind of thirst for information, and that I get really excited about sharing with other people. And I've been told that I can take very complex ideas and I could communicate the driving point in a way that is really accessible to people, which, I love hearing that because I want to make information and knowledge as accessible to people as possible.
Yeah.
I think that truly is one of the key factors in organizing for change.
Sure.
Is for people to be informed, right? So that was the knowledge share role. And the third one, which is a weaver of relationships and ideas, I think the way that I view the world, and especially this speaks more to my professional experience. I have a background in public health and community nutrition. I was in the culinary and hospitality industry for a while, right? And I've been very blessed with the ability to leverage the skill set and expertise and bits of knowledge from each field that I've been in or had the opportunity to work in and apply it to what I'm working in currently.
Nice.
So, for example, a lot of the work now that I do in public health around, deconstructing the status quo, right? And examining the status quo, I feel like I pull a lot of knowledge from my anthropology days, right? So I have an undergraduate degree in anthropology, but a focus on like food, nutrition, and health. I draw a lot from that. I draw from working on the ground as a nutritionist at a community-based organization. I draw even from, my hospitality days, being a line cook or being a server, right?
Sure.
A lot of the skills that I use around customer service and around working well under high amounts of stress. So I'm really able to apply that interdisciplinary approach in my work and be able to take ideas, kind of bust open the silos and take ideas and be able to make connections that I think a lot of people won't be able to because they've kind of only confined themselves to one area during their profession. So I think I've been lucky in that way.
That's awesome. Reminds me a bit of myself, and I have a lot of, we don't need to go into it, but a lot of different experiences, and I kind of can pull from like my professional theater background, my dance experience.
You're a theater person too? I know that I did theater growing up.
Oh my goodness. So we have that in common too.
Love it. Speech and debate too.
Oh, cool.
Like in terms of my public speaking, being able to turn myself on and off because I am introverted, like that's totally my theater background. That's totally my speech and debate days.
Awesome.
That kind of equipped me with that. So I love that about you too.
That's so cool. So I think that leads nicely into kind of the work you're doing with your business, Embody Lib. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Embody Lib has been around unofficially since 2018. It sprung out of a need for me to pursue recovery on my own terms, to pursue eating disorder recovery specifically. So I was diagnosed with an eating disorder in fall, winter of 2017. When I entered treatment from January through May of 2018, I was an intensive outpatient. I quickly learned that the treatment model, the diagnosis, pretty much everything was not designed with someone like me in mind, right? I was higher weight. A lot of my disordered eating behaviors, the root of it, right, wasn't necessarily from a pursuit to be thin. It was some, but a lot of it was based in trauma around my identity as someone that is a Latin person of color, someone that is queer, right? Someone that navigates invisible like disability, mental illness. I learned very quickly that program was not going to be the sole source of my recovery. So what I did is that I hopped on social media. I hopped on Instagram, and I just started sharing, right, what I was feeling and my experiences in trying to recover from an eating disorder, while also holding these like multiple identities that have been historically marginalized. And I started finding community, and I started learning there were actually a lot of people with very similar experiences. And so I set out to develop a platform in which, right, we could support each other. We can empower one another, and see if changes could be made, but not only in the eating disorder space, in spaces where bodies are oppressed due to some sort of identity they hold that doesn't align with the dominant social structure, right? So people living in higher weight fat bodies, people living in Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, people living in queer, right? Whether they're genderqueer or whether they are queer in their sexuality, right? All of the ways that we are othered, and how that shows up in the body, right? Like, how do we examine that, and how do we work to change that? Yeah. So Embody Lib was the result, and that means to embody body liberation. Yeah. And so that's it for short. And so it's been almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years in October. And the goal of Embody Lib is to support people of the global majority. So I call people of the global majority are Black, Brown, or Indigenous people of color, because believe it or not, these people actually make up the majority of the global population, right? People of the global majority in reclaiming their health and their well-being. And instead of having dominant social systems define what it is and make it so unachievable, right, that we get distracted and just constantly pursuing this notion of health, this notion of well-being that was, again, not designed with people like me in mind. So Embody Lib, right? So we do this in a couple different ways. The first is we engage in advocacy. So my Instagram handle is called the Body Lib Advocate, and that's because I have a pretty strong background in policy work and grassroots advocacy. And so I wanted to use Embody Lib as a way to help disrupt the status quo of institutions, structures, systems, policies that were negatively impacting the health and well-being of Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color, right? So that's one thing that Embody Lib does. The second is that we engage in a lot of education. We engage in a lot of training. We work with health, medical, nutrition, and wellness providers in applying weight-inclusive, interdisciplinary, and multidimensional frameworks into their programming, into their organizations that help historically marginalized communities thrive, right? And we do this all through a body liberated lens. And so the way we kind of do this, I offer, I do professional coaching, we do like project consulting, but mainly we create and facilitate learning experiences. So like training, right? Workshops, things like that. And the third thing that Embody Lib does is empowerment within communities. So we seek to be in community and help empower queer, higher weight, fat, Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color in becoming their own body liberation advocates. And that is because, right, we can only work on the individual for so long until we start coming against systemic barriers that keep us from really thriving at our fullest potential. So we have to be working both on the individual level, but also with the collective, right, on the systemic level to make changes in order to pursue what I call body liberation.
Yeah. What an incredibly vulnerable and powerful, I would imagine, kind of process that was for you. Thank you for sharing. I'm also in eating disorder recovery. And so being able to kind of take that and turn it into something, really powerful to help other people and raise up voices and continue to advocate. That's awesome. Thank you for that work.
Thank you. And yeah, this is something that I knew as I was going through this, I can't be alone in this. I can't be alone in this struggle. It's so pervasive.
100%.
Right, throughout the system. And there are so many people struggling. If there weren't, we wouldn't be seeing the things that we're seeing today in terms of health disparities, in terms of, like declining mental health, right? Like the disparities we see in other sectors, education, employment, et cetera. So I knew from the jump that I couldn't be alone. I just needed to find others. I needed to find you, right? Like I needed to find the community in where we could organize and turn this into a bigger movement.
Awesome. Very cool. Did you hear the news about our exciting new offering from the Self-Care Cabaret? We're calling it Talkback. If you're familiar with the theater space, you may have participated in a talkback before. After a performance, the cast and crew will come back on stage to chat with the audience and answer questions. Think of it as a casual guided discussion. Inspired by this and by popular interest, we've come up with a talkback for the Self-Care Cabaret podcast. Groups will listen to a podcast episode or two of their choosing, then I'll come and lead your discussion either in person or virtually of those episodes, expanding on the big ideas. It's a great option for groups looking for short, impactful professional development, or smaller teams looking to get an introduction to self-care and well-being. We have done a few of these so far, and let me say, they have been so much fun. So if you're interested in bringing a talkback to your group or organization, email podcast@drmcselfcare.com. And now, on with the show. So I'm wondering if you could explain kind of how would you explain body liberation to someone who maybe hasn't heard of it before or isn't quite sure what it is?
Yeah. So body liberation has gotten a lot more popular, I think, since when I first started my platform on Instagram. I originally heard body liberation from this book called Land Whale by Jess Baker.
Say the title again.
And Land Whale.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
By Jess Baker. And this definition really, I resonated a lot with it because I was seeing at that time, right, we're about 5 years ago, there was a emerging interest around body positivity on social media. This was 2018, 2019. And it started becoming more popular. But what I was seeing, I didn't know the roots of it. All I knew was what I was seeing in kind of the mainstream spaces. And I was seeing, kind of straight size to plus size, but on the lower end, usually cis women.
Sure.
In lighter skinned or white bodies that were, posing in bikinis or, showing their stretch marks or, kind of jiggling their bellies or like folding their bellies over. And, I thought that was nice. Like, oh, like this is nice. But as someone that I never, maybe at the height of one of my eating disorder periods of time, but for the most part, my beauty ideal, meaning that the ideal that I grew up with in my culture, so I'm from Puerto Rico, right? The Latin diaspora, didn't really value like being super thin as attractive.
Sure.
right? So seeing those, right, like I was like, okay, like that's nice. They look like quote unquote quote normal bodies.
Right.
But growing up, even though I had an eating disorder, well, I still do have an eating disorder, I was never super worried about that stuff, like stretch marks or like a little belly and stuff, because that was kind of normalized, I guess, right?
Yeah.
To an extent. And so, but this was the face of body positivity. And I was like, I don't know, like this just doesn't speak to me. But when I read what Jess Baker defined as body liberation, as like, beyond loving your body, it is the knowing that your body deserves to be liberated in whatever state is in, right? And as someone that had, deep disdain over my body on multiple levels, not just physically, but I was struggling a lot with my sexual identity, with my gender, right, with my racial identity. Body liberation just seemed to fit a little bit more what I was looking for. But it's not a new idea, right? Jess Baker, some other folks, the Fat Underground, Lindley Ashline, like those folks talk a lot about body liberation, but especially, Black and brown women, non-binary and gender conforming people. I'm thinking like Ivy Felicia, Dalia Kingsley, Chrissy King, Deshaun Harrison, right? Like they've all been able to contribute to what I now think is my definition for body liberation. And that, what I believe, body liberation is the journey. So it's twofold, right? It is the journey of examining the systems in which the body is politicized. And what that means is our bodies, right? There is an inherent value placed on our bodies depending on which social identities we hold, right? And their proximity to power, which is the dominant social group, or further away from power. So an example of that is race, right? We look at the way that our economic, social structures, hierarchies are here in the Western world. We have a tendency to see white people be closer to this kind of notion of power and who's furthest away.
Right.
It's usually Black folks, right? So it's examining that, right? Why is this? Why are we politicizing the body? And how does this inform the way that we navigate through society today? And we're doing this all at the same time. We are embodying liberatory practice. I say praxis because it's theory and practice together. That's aimed at freeing ourselves, right? Freeing ourselves from ourselves, freeing ourselves
I like that.
from our internalized narratives that, we're not this, we don't deserve this, right, etc. Embodying liberatory praxis aimed at both freeing us, the individual, as well as the collective.
Yeah.
So this is examining systems, but also engaging in practices that free the community, right? So it takes on a much broader approach, takes on how we look at policy, takes on how we engage in our civic duty, right? It includes how we show up for justice. Yeah. So it includes all of that. So after all these years of kind of thinking and reflecting on the way that other people define body liberation, this is how I define body liberation.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I feel like it's so much, like you said, it's broader, but I feel like it's also deeper than body positivity. And sometimes, body positivity, I see those posts on Instagram too, and some of them make me raise an eyebrow. I'm like, okay, what is this really? A lot of times I feel like
it stops,
yeah,
right? I feel it's really limiting. Like it stops, like once you love your body, you're done with the work.
Right, sure.
But then what about everybody else?
Right. But I feel like it also, it's depending upon whose post you're seeing and whatnot. There's a lot of like throwing around body positivity, but is it really, it's too steeped in diet culture.
I don't even engage with it anymore, to be honest. Like I used to follow it, the hashtag.
Yeah, no, I don't either, but
I am so, I feel like I've just grown, like I've evolved. So like I don't really engage in those spaces anymore. So I don't really know
Yeah.
like what's
Well, every once in a while,
happening.
one pops through and I'll see something. And I'm just like, oh, is that really? I don't know.
Well,
It's all good. That's why that unfollow, mute, block, unsubscribe, those are really liberating buttons to use.
And like you wish them well,
Oh,
right?
100%.
You wish them well on your journey, but I'm not necessarily going to be there with you,
Right.
but I wish you well.
Yeah, no, very cool though. I thank you for explaining that kind of the difference, and it is much broader and deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So you like to, a lot of the work that you do, and you said this a little bit too, is about, disrupting status quo, and specifically in current health and wellness spaces. Can you explain that like a little bit more, and how could someone advocate for their needs in a space like that?
Absolutely. I can share my experience, and I will be frank in that my experience is still really difficult. To be labeled to work to actively disrupt the status quo involves a lot of rejection, involves in a lot of retaliation. It is not easy, 100%. Whether you're advocating for yourself in a doctor's office, right? Or whether you're advocating for yourself and for what you believe in an employment setting.
Sure.
Right. This disruption is probably one of the most uncomfortable and unrewarding, depending on how you define rewarding, unrewarding processes you can engage in, right? And it's unrewarding in the sense that it's personally unrewarding because it's you get a lot of crap, right? But you have to keep in mind what the bigger picture is.
Exactly.
And so the way that I do it, right, it's from a couple of different aspects, right? You can do it personally for yourself when you seek healthcare services, right? So I have come along in my journey far enough where I have had the privilege as well as the opportunity to get healthcare providers that are weight inclusive, and if they're not, at least weight neutral.
Sure.
And if they do bring up my weight, that's usually attached to like another kind of racial qualifier, like, oh, you're also Latina, so you're at higher risk for X, Y, and Z, right? So, but really coming prepared with an arsenal where you can advocate for yourself and your rights as a patient,
right,
and you know where to go when that visit does not go well, right? And I often think as somebody that I've been working in public health specifically for over 10, 12 years, right? So I'm pretty knowledgeable. I'm pretty well versed in a lot of aspects of healthcare and the law and what providers can or cannot do. And I understand that in itself is a privilege.
Yeah.
Right. That a lot of folks that are not in the sphere of work, in a way, healthcare and medical care do not make it easy to be your self-advocate.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think too, I think about some of my own experiences and with my mom too, we both are in larger bodies. My mom, her whole life, she was heavy as a kid, and she'll talk about, now she'll push back because of me and other experts that she's, connected with, or whatever she learned or whatever. So she'll push back at doctors now, and she'll say to me, Teresa, growing up, we were not taught to question the doctor. You didn't question you didn't this is not what you did. So even sometimes now, and I always say this when I'm doing my self-care workshops, I'll talk about the physical medical domain. And I always do a disclaimer, listen, I'll speak for myself. In a larger body, it's really hard to get weight neutral or weight inclusive care because I go in, my toes hanging off and the doctor's like, what's your diet exercise look like?
Have you tried losing weight?
Exactly. And you wouldn't believe, I always get people that are like, oh my God, I've had the same experience, and it might be annoying, but it's worthwhile to find those practitioners.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I think that folks need to remember that medical providers, doctors, they take an oath to do no harm. And if you tell them, hey, this is causing me harm, they are under an obligation to adapt their treatment plan or their approach for you not to feel harmed.
Yeah.
That is an ethical obligation.
100%.
And so, right, like, I am hearing more about this being referred to as the doctor-patient relationship.
Absolutely.
Right? A relationship goes both
Right.
ways. And I hear you. I think a lot of people see medical providers as absolute authorities. Right. And don't get me wrong, they are well educated. They are incredibly smart people, right? But still, at the same time, you are the expert of your body. And you owe it to yourself to enter in a consensual relationship, a professional medical relationship, to ask questions and get more knowledge and be completely informed in any decision you make about your body. That is your right, both from a legal perspective and from an ethical perspective.
100%. I had somebody recently, it was last week sometime, I don't remember who it was like, oh, well, I went to the doctors, they have to weigh you. I was like, oh, well, actually you can ask them not to. Well, yeah, like, I know you can, but like, I'm like, no, like, I need you to hear me. Like, you don't have to be weighed at the doctor's office. Like, I repeat it back to me for next time. Like, and it, like, they tried, I could see like the look. I'm like, come on. Like,
yeah, you don't have to be weighed every time.
Remember this for next time.
You can decline being weighed. You can, come up with a plan of action that if your doctor does need your weight for one reason or another, you can negotiate that. Like, you can negotiate everything.
Sure.
Because you are the expert of your body. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Awesome. We need more people to understand these concepts, though, and to start cultivating those patient, doctor relationship that are healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Healthy, like
it goes two ways.
Yeah, it's Reagan, who I did one of her workshops, Reagan Chastain, and she was like, you're looking for a partner with you in your healthcare, not a parent.
Absolutely.
Like, not an authoritative figure that's just going to scold you, like a partner. Awesome.
Yeah, Reagan, you can't beat Reagan, and her resources and the way that she empowers in people who are seeking healthcare, medical treatment,
100%.
In becoming their own advocates on their bodies. Yeah. I think she's an incredibly rich resource.
Agreed. We got to get her on the podcast one of these days.
Yeah.
So my last question for you is, I noticed in your bio you talk about your love of cooking and how much joy it brings you. So I'm just curious, what's your favorite meal to cook or your favorite thing to cook?
I'm such a seasonal cook. Like, I get really excited to cook things based on the season. Okay. So, for example, we're entering the warmer weather. I am a beast on a grill. Okay. I will grill anything and everything. I will cook all of my meals on a grill. And I have recipes
fun
to match. During the cooler weather, of course, I'm a huge fan of soups.
Nice.
I could probably eat soup every day. But yeah, like, I love variety in what I eat, right? I cannot be like one of those people. My spouse, they could eat the same thing every day and never think twice about it. I need to
I'm not like that either.
Eat different things every single day, have, like a range. So that's how I am with cooking as well. Sometimes I really get in the mood to cook a certain cuisine. And just kind of exhaust every single recipe technique I can. And then I'll kind of move on to something else. So, but right now, grilling for sure.
Yeah, we're definitely in grilling season. Or fastly approaching anyway. And certainly, I know you did mention your Instagram page, but if you just want to remind folks where they can connect with you and find you, your website, social media handles, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a website. It is www.embodylib.com. melito.com. And then you could find me on Instagram. I also post a lot of specialized content on Buy Me a Coffee. That's buymeacoffee.com/embodylib. And I'll do audio posts. I do essays. I review books. I offer a ton of resources on my body on my Buy Me a Coffee that you don't necessarily see on my website. And I have a mailing list. If you go on my website or if you visit my Instagram page, the Bodylib Advocate, it's the_bodylib, BODYLIB_advocate. You'll see links to join my mailing list and
Awesome.
my Facebook, Twitter, etc. But I'm not as active on those.
Sure. Yeah, well, we'll make sure that's all linked in the episode notes, and you gave us some other resources. We'll make sure that those are linked there as well, the book you recommended and whatnot. But thank you so much for joining me on the Dr. MC Self-Care Cabaret podcast.
Awesome. I am so glad that we got the time to talk today. I love just sharing space with someone that sees self-care the same way I do, and, helping and sharing it with the world.
Awesome. Likewise. Thanks, Patrilie. Wasn't Patrilie great? I love how she defined self-care for herself and how she hit on so many of the domains that we know and love here at the Self-Care Cabaret. And her work is so important. I love how she explained the difference between body positivity and body liberation, and what she said about the medical profession. Spot on, in my opinion. And remember, you are the expert on your body. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you're feeling more energized and empowered. If you liked what you heard today, subscribe and leave a review for this podcast on your preferred platform. Follow along on Facebook and Instagram at Dr. MC Self-Care and Dr. MC's Self-Care Cabaret on LinkedIn. You can also visit my website, drmcselfcare.com, for the latest updates and to sign up for Cast Party, my e-newsletter. And if you're interested in having me present to an audience near you, email info@drmcselfcare.com. Thanks again. Stay well and do good.